Almost 2 decades ago, the state adopted two complex financial transactions known as the triple flip and the VLF swap. Under these transactions, city and county sales tax and VLF revenues were reduced and replaced with property taxes shifted from schools. More specifically, property taxes were shifted from a county-wide account known as the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund, or ERAF, and in some instances were shifted from individual K-12 and community college districts. Over the last 2 years, a small number of local governments in 2 counties did not receive enough property taxes to be fully reimbursed for their second financial transaction, the VLF swap. This situation is known as insufficient ERAF. If cities and counties facing insufficient ERAF are to receive full reimbursement under the VLF swap, further state action is required. Insufficient ERAF is largely a byproduct of California's complex system of allocating property taxes amongst local governments, and really isn't the result of any particular actions of cities, counties, or the state. However, there are some particular characteristics of certain counties that make them more at risk of facing insufficient ERAF, particularly counties with relatively higher property values, or where a higher share of the property taxes are allocated to K-12 and community college districts, or also counties that serve a relatively smaller school-age population are more likely to face insufficient ERAF. In addition, some state actions can indirectly influence the occurrence of insufficient ERAF, particularly state changes in per-student funding for K-12 districts and community colleges, or changes in property taxes to K-12 districts and community colleges, such as the dissolution of redevelopment, which provides an increase in property taxes to schools. Given these factors, and based on our review of city and county financial data, we think that it's likely that insufficient ERAF may grow over the next few years, potentially reaching the tens of millions in some years. And it may also impact reimbursement of triple flip payments to some cities and counties. However, after 2016-17, we expect that the occurrences of insufficient ERAF will decrease significantly and may be completely eliminated in some years. In addressing future occurrences of insufficient ERAF, the Legislature is faced with 2 primary decisions: how much cities and counties should be compensated for insufficient ERAF and how they should be compensated. We feel there are 2 reasonable options the Legislature may wish to consider in answering each of these questions. First, in terms of compensation, we feel a strong argument can be made that because insufficient ERAF didn't arise out of any particular actions of cities and counties, that all cities and counties facing insufficient ERAF should be fully reimbursed for their VLF swap losses, in addition to any triple flip losses that may arise in the future. However, we also think it would be reasonable for the Legislature, in recognition of significant fiscal benefits that cities and counties have received from the VLF swap, to reduce reimbursement for insufficient ERAF to cities and counties, limiting it only to the amount necessary to reimburse them for their actual VLF revenue losses. Under the VLF swap, cities and counties originally received a payment equal to their VLF losses in 2004-05. However, this payment grew with increases in property values as opposed to increases in VLF revenue, and as a result, VLF swap payments are now significantly higher than the VLF revenues that they were intended to replace. Once the Legislature has decided how much compensation to provide cities and counties for insufficient ERAF, they'll have to decide on a mechanism for providing that compensation. One option is to appropriate these payments annually in the state budget. An advantage of this approach would be that it would allow the Legislature to weigh the cost of providing these payments against other state budgeting priorities on an annual basis. On the other hand, this would provide somewhat less revenue stability for local governments, and we note that the original VLF swap mechanism was set up to provide such revenue security to local governments. One option that does provide for a locally controlled revenue source as a reimbursement for insufficient ERAF is a redirection of property taxes from county offices of education and special ed programs. Under the state's education financing system, reductions in property taxes to county offices of ed and special education programs would be backfilled with additional state aid, and so these programs would not likely be harmed if their property taxes were shifted to fund insufficient ERAF. Ultimately, in making a decision on how to approach insufficient ERAF, the legislature will have to balance trade-offs between funding for state and local programs and weigh implicit commitments made by past legislatures.